Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, December 13th, 2022. The House Financial Services Committee holds a hearing on the collapse of the FTX cryptocurrency exchange after Monday night's arrest of the founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, on charges that include securities fraud and money laundering. The new FTX CEO, John Ray, telling lawmakers this is really just old-fashioned embezzlement. This is just taking money from customers and using it for your own purpose, not sophisticated at all. Coming up, we'll hear from John Ray at the hearing and some lawmakers, as well as talk with Sylvan, finance and economics reporter with The Hill. Inflation report for November from the Labor Department. Consumer prices rose 7.7% year over year, still high, but lower than October's number, and lower in November than what most analysts expected. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm announcing a breakthrough in fusion energy research, more energy coming out of an experiment than going in for the first time in history. We'll hear from the Secretary and talk with an energy reporter at Vox, Umair Irfan. President Joe Biden signing into law a bill that gives federal protection to same-sex and interracial marriages. The president saying if there's one message that breaks through from today, it's that this law and the love it defends strikes a blow against hate in all its forms. And Republican Congressman Andy Biggs calling for the impeachment of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas on the grounds that he did not secure the U.S.-Mexico border against illegal immigrants and drug trafficking. Associated Press writing the U.S. government charged Sam Bankman-Fried, the founder and former CEO of cryptocurrency exchange FTX, with a host of financial crimes on Tuesday, alleging he intentionally deceived customers and investors to enrich himself and others while playing a central role in the company's multi-billion-dollar collapse. Sam Bankman-Fried was arrested Monday by Bahamian authorities at the request of the U.S. government. He's also charged with making illegal campaign contributions, a notable charge as he was one of the largest political donors this year. The criminal indictment is on top of civil charges announced earlier Tuesday by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC alleging that he defrauded investors and illegally used their money to buy real estate on behalf of himself and family. The maximum potential prison exposure from these charges is 115 years, according to a spokesman for U.S. prosecutors. That's all from Associated Press. Sam Bankman-Fried was originally due to testify today remotely before the U.S. House Financial Services Committee about the FTX collapse. He did not after that arrest. Instead, only the other scheduled witness testified, the current FTX CEO, John Ray, who's overseeing the bankruptcy proceedings.
The FTX group's collapse appears to stem from absolute concentration of control in the hands of a small group of grossly inexperienced and unsophisticated individuals who failed to implement virtually any of the systems or controls that are necessary for a company entrusted with other people's money or assets. Some of the unacceptable management practices identified so far include the use of computer infrastructure that gave individuals in senior management access to systems that stored customer assets without security controls to prevent them from redirecting those assets. The storing of certain private keys to access hundreds of millions of dollars in crypto assets without effective security controls or encryption. The ability of Alameda to borrow funds held at FTX.com to be utilized for its own trading or investments without any effective limits whatsoever. The commingling of assets, the lack of complete documentation for transactions involving nearly 500 separate investments made with FTX Group funds and assets, and the absence of audited or reliable financial statements, the lack of personnel in financial and risk management functions, and the absence of independent governance throughout the FTX Group. A fundamental challenge we face is that we're in many respects starting from near zero in terms of the corporate infrastructure and record keeping that one would expect in a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Still, in just over 4 weeks, we've instituted meaningful steps to gain command and control, and every week we gain a better understanding of what occurred and the path forward, all of which will be shared with interested parties and affected parties throughout the Chapter 11 processes.
FTX CEO John Ray testifying today before the House Financial Services Committee. While most members of the committee questioned John Ray about the details of how FTX went bankrupt, the chair and ranking member of the committee opened the hearing with some thoughts on the larger issue of cryptocurrency regulation. First, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, chair of the committee.
Under my leadership over the past 4 years, this committee has closely focused on the growth and popularity of crypto precisely because of the many concerns that the failure of FTX has highlighted. Last year, I created a digital assets working group comprised of Democratic members of the committee with the goal of learning more about the underlying technologies, applications for finance, and the risk they pose to customers, consumers, and the economy. When the President's Working Group on Financial Markets urged Congress to safeguard the economy from stablecoin risk, I and Ranking Member McHenry jumped into action and continued to work on a bill with the members of this committee. The ongoing failures of crypto firms like Terra USD, Celsius, BlockFi, and most significantly, FTX and Alameda Research only serves to strengthen the importance for Congress and the public to understand the harm caused to customers, what laws have been broken or flaunted, and how Congress and the regulators can prevent this from happening again.
Congresswoman Maxine Waters, chair of the House Financial Services Committee at today's hearing. The current ranking Republican is Patrick McHenry of North Carolina. He is due to become chairman in the next Congress when the Republicans have the majority. He had a different take on FTX, former CEO Sam Bankman-Fried, and crypto regulation.
Bankman-Fried's play is nothing new. We've seen it before. In the late 1800s, when the Union Pacific purposefully inflated the price of railroad construction to line its executive pockets. Or in the 1900s, when the con man George C. Parker was arrested for illegally, quote-unquote, selling the Brooklyn Bridge, Madison Square Garden, and the Statue of Liberty. And in the 2000s, when it was revealed Enron engaged in a massive corporate fraud and corruption, sending shockwaves throughout the business world. There are many comparisons you can draw between each one of these pretenders and the alleged actions of Mr. Bankman-Fried. It appears to be the same old-school fraud, just using new technology. But it's important to note, and I think it's very important to note, we still use railroads, we still buy and sell real estate, and we still rely on businesses to provide services. We have to separate out the bad actions of an individual from the good created by an industry and an innovation. So let me be clear. I believe in the promise of digital assets and those around the world building on blockchain technologies. And that's why I've worked and will continue to work to provide clear rules of the road for the digital asset ecosystem here in the United States. And that's how we protect American consumers and investors in this marketplace and allow innovation to occur here in the United States.
Congressman Patrick McHenry. Sylvan Lane is finance and economics policy reporter with The Hill, has been following today's House Financial Services Committee hearing on the collapse of FTX, joining us now by phone. Thank you very much. What did we learn today about why this $30 billion company imploded so quickly?
Certainly. We learned a lot today about, the steps that Sam Bankman-Fried, the former CEO of FTX, and several senior executives at the company took that ultimately led to the company imploding. The way John Ray III, the new CEO appointed by courts to handle FTX's bankruptcy, what he described was a company that was handling billions of dollars in other people's money without anything close to the necessary oversight or controls that were going on. This is a company that didn't have an accounting department. It used internet messages and QuickBooks to handle billions of dollars in assets and loans. The senior executives had unfettered access to customer money and spent it on, a wide range of personal investments and products. There's no sense of how much money is still out there or how much money is totally lost. But we know that roughly $8 billion worth of FTX customer money has been lost in this collapse, and Ray and his team are racing to figure out where the rest of it is.
How many Americans lost money in this mess?
It's difficult to say because FTX was based in the Bahamas, operated a few different affiliates, and we're not quite sure how many Americans were using the international trading platform through a special internet connection or using the American service. But we know that roughly 1 million FTX customers, most of which are based outside of the U.S., have lost money in this implosion.
So hanging over this hearing, besides this specific company, is the issue of whether and how to regulate cryptocurrency. What is the status of that effort?
Certainly. So lawmakers have been at a logjam over how to effectively regulate cryptocurrency for years now. And that's because cryptocurrencies and the companies that hold them, trade them, create them, allow people to buy and sell them, they don't fit neatly into the jurisdiction of one federal regulator or another. There's aspects of them that are kind of like stocks. There's aspects of them that are kind of like gold or, futures contracts. It's a very complicated situation. And lawmakers know they need to figure out somebody to put in charge of looking at these companies and making sure that things like these lack of controls and this flagrant misuse of customer money is caught by the federal government before it ends up with a company imploding or people losing billions of dollars. The problem is Democrats and Republicans have very different views on which company or which regulator should be in charge of that, how much they should be in charge of, and how strict these rules should be. It doesn't seem like we're getting much closer to figuring out how to go about regulating crypto, but the urgency has certainly increased.
We're talking with Sylvan Lane from The Hill. That urgency seems to be because there is a potential of cryptocurrency use growing and causing some potential harm to the overall economy. What are lawmakers and regulators worried about?
So the main issue at hand right now is making sure that federal regulators and lawmakers have a good enough sense of what's going on in the cryptocurrency industry to make sure that they can snuff out frauds and other schemes that could hurt people like the FTX implosion. But lawmakers are also concerned about the implications of the cryptocurrency world exploding on, normal, regular financial markets. Now, thankfully, we have not seen the chaos in the crypto world translate to anything like what happened when the mortgage bubble burst in 2008. That said, there are lawmakers who are concerned and experts who are concerned that banks who have close relationships with crypto firms could fail if those firms go defunct and cause broader losses and harm throughout the banking system. Now, we don't have any reason to think that there's anything like that that could set off a financial crisis because of crypto right now. But lawmakers don't want crypto to grow into something that could create that bigger crisis.
And finally, the former CEO, Sam Bankman-Fried, was supposed to testify today remotely from the Bahamas, but was arrested last night. Did the committee know about this? Did they discuss that at all?
No. So the arrest of Sam Bankman-Fried came as a surprise to seemingly everybody outside of his legal orbit, including the chairwoman of the committee, Maxine Waters, a Democrat from California who has been very skeptical and concerned about the way cryptocurrencies could be harmful to Americans. She said she was surprised, and honestly, some lawmakers seemed a little bit disappointed that they weren't able to actually ask him questions and get their moment of grilling him. That said, there isn't anybody that I've seen at least saying that he shouldn't have been arrested, and all the lawmakers that I've seen and heard have been hopeful that this is the first step toward justice for those who he harmed.
Sylvan Lane is finance and economic policy reporter with The Hill. Find his stories at thehill.com and on Twitter at Sylvan Lane. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
New inflation report out from the Labor Department's Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Consumer Price Index up in November 7.1% versus last year. That number is down from 7.7% in October. Yahoo Finance writes that inflation moderated again last month, marking a second consecutive downside surprise in consumer price data and sending stocks higher. While Tuesday's print marked the lowest CPI reading since December 2021, inflation continues to weigh on household budgets and run more than 3 times above the Federal Reserve's long-term target of 2%. That was from Yahoo Finance. President Biden reacting to the report at the White House.
This morning, we received some welcome news, in my view, and I think the view of most economists on the economic front. News that provides a reason for some optimism for the holiday season, and I would argue for the year ahead. We learned last month's inflation rate came down more than experts expected. In a world where inflation is rising at double digits in many major economies around the world, inflation is coming down in America. In fact, this new report is the 5th month in a row where annual inflation has fallen in the United States. Inflation outside from food and energy, a key measure that economists use, also fell. Make no mistake, prices are still too high. We have a lot more work to do, but things are getting better, headed in the right direction. Most Americans can see the progress driving down the street, finding relief at the pump as gas prices fall. Gas prices are now lower than they were a year ago, and half the gas stations selling gas at $3.09 or less. The most common price for gas stations across the country is $2.99. The decline in gas prices is giving consumers a break they need, helping them keep our economy going. When you have a two-car family, they're saving hundreds of dollars a month. It's a big deal. Today's report contains another piece of good news. Food inflation has slowed last month, providing much-needed relief for millions of families at the grocery store. This is welcome news for families across the country as they get ready for the holiday celebrations and for family dinners.
President Biden at the White House. At the end of his prepared remarks, reporter asked him when he thinks inflation will come down to more normal levels.
Can you say when you expect prices to get back to normal, Mr. President?
I hope by the end of next year we're much closer, but I can't make that prediction. I'm convinced they're not going to go up. I'm convinced they're going to continue from there.
President Biden at the White House. Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the minority whip, speaking at a news conference on Capitol Hill, talking about what he sees in the inflation report.
Last week, the President's Chief of Staff said these words: fiscal responsibility is very important to us in the Biden administration. And I think the American people know that nothing could be further from the truth. We've seen record inflation borne out again today by the latest CPI numbers, but if you look at the increase in the cost of everything since this administration has taken office, it's gone up 13.8%. Overall, if you look at groceries, a 12% increase, electricity, 13.7% increase, and this is year-over-year numbers, and fuel oil 65.7% increase year-over-year. And this is a result of the massive amount of spending that this administration and on a party line vote, the Democrats here in the Congress have approved in the last couple of years. It's as simple as that. And so what happens now is the Fed meets tomorrow, and they're, again, looking at another increase in interest rates, which for the American people who are putting more and more on their credit cards, looking at price for automobiles, price for homes, other things that they buy on credit, interest rates continuing to go up.
Senator John Thune is the minority whip, Republican from South Dakota, at a news conference with other Senate Republicans today on Capitol Hill. The Federal Reserve Board, as he mentioned, meets Wednesday, expected to raise interest rates again, this time by half a percentage point instead of the 0.75 of a point. That's been the case in the past number of meetings. This is all part of an ongoing effort by the Fed to bring down inflation. CNBC reports economists say an important part of the Fed's forecast will be information on where officials see the terminal rate or high water mark for Fed funds by next spring. Fed officials are expected to raise their forecast to 5% or even slightly more from 4.6%. The Fed funds target rate range is currently 3.75% to 4%. More about the negotiations to fund the federal government today. The current funding expires on Friday. A one-week extension is expected, so the real deadline is December 23rd to reach some sort of deal. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer saying that he expects the full fiscal year government funding bill, known as an omnibus, which is under discussion, to include more aid for Ukraine and also a measure to reform the way Congress certifies presidential elections.
Negotiations for the year-long omnibus continue forward. Though we're working tirelessly, we need a bit more time beyond this week to get an omnibus done, avoid a needless shutdown. That said, the Senate should be prepared to pass a one-week CR this week and give negotiators more time to finish up before the holidays. An omnibus remains the best and most responsible option to ensure we have all the resources we need to serve the American people at full capacity like they deserve. And I expect an omnibus will contain priorities that both sides want, including more funding for Ukraine and the Electoral Count Act, which my colleagues in the Rules Committee have really done a very good job on. And after all the work we've done this year to pass important new bills, a long-term CR could prevent investments. Take, for instance, the PACT Act. It's a great thing. Everyone likes it. Passed with 80-some-odd votes, I think. We need to fund it. You have a CR, it won't be funded, and those veterans will be left out. Okay, so the vast majority of us don't want to see a CR, and there's absolutely no reason for it to happen. That's why the best option for American people is to proceed to an omnibus.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, at a news conference with other Senate Democrats today on Capitol Hill. A CR is a continuing resolution that would fund the federal government either temporarily or perhaps for the full fiscal year through October of 2023, but it would do so at current levels, whereas an omnibus would allow for variations in what is funded and by how much. Senator Schumer today also saying that Senator Joe Manchin's permitting reform bill dealing with energy projects will be offered as an amendment to the other big bill moving through Congress, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. Senator Manchin, a Democrat from West Virginia. Senate Republicans at their own news conference today, and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell asked about the government funding talks.
Leader McConnell, what do you say to Republicans who say this is the same type of operation we go through most years at this time of year? You had Scott Perry, a prominent member of the Freedom Caucus, saying McConnell is going to roll us here with a big spending bill here. Just last week, you were suggesting there might not be enough time to do a short-term bill. Now you're saying there is enough time unless they don't get it done by the 22nd. What do you say?
What I would say is I've been the majority leader and I've been the minority leader. Majority is better. Senator Schumer's in charge of the floor. He determines whether or not we pass individual appropriation bills, and he decides how to process them. So we're on defense. We're dealing with the cards that we were dealt. And what I would say is, given the fact that the Democrats have this presidency, the House, and the Senate, to meet our defense number and to not pay any bonus to the Democrats on the domestic side to achieve the defense number is far and away the best we could do, given the fact that we don't control the floor or the government.
The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, with reporters on Capitol Hill. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 103, NASDAQ up 113, S&P up 29. The U.S. Department of Energy tweeting this morning, breaking news. This is an announcement that has been decades in the making. On December 5th, 2022, a team of DOE's Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories National Ignition Facility made history by achieving fusion ignition. This breakthrough will change the future of clean power and America's national defense forever. That tweet from the Energy Department. The Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm explaining more at a news conference.
Today we're here to talk about fusion, combining two particles into one. Last week at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California, scientists at the National Ignition Facility achieved fusion ignition. And that is creating more energy from fusion reactions than the energy used to start the process. It's the first time it has ever been done in a laboratory, anywhere in the world. Simply put, this is one of the most impressive scientific feats of the 21st century. Or, as the president might say, right? I do think he probably did say this is a BFD. Researchers at Livermore and around the world have been working on this moment for more than 60 years. So, what does this accomplishment do? Two things. First, it strengthens our national security because it opens a new realm for maintaining a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent in an age where we do not have nuclear testing. Ignition allows us to replicate, for the first time, certain conditions that are found only in the stars and the sun. And the second thing it does, of course, is that this milestone moves us one significant step closer to the possibility of zero carbon, abundant fusion energy powering our society. If we can advance fusion energy, we could use it to produce clean electricity, transportation fuels, power heavy industry, so much more. It would be like adding a power drill to our toolbox in building this clean energy economy. So today, we tell the world that America has achieved a tremendous scientific breakthrough, one that happened because we invested in our national labs and we invested in fundamental research.
Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm at a news conference in Washington. Umair Irfan is a senior correspondent with Vox covering energy policy, joining us now by phone with more on what everyone is saying is a big deal. Mr. Irfan, how big is this?
This is a long-running target for science, for researchers here who have been studying fusion energy. This is something that they've been in pursuit of for decades. This was the main goalpost that was set out by the National Academy of Sciences back in 1997. And they've gotten tantalizingly close for years, but only now have they finally crossed the threshold where they're able to actually generate more energy from fusion than they put in.
The Energy Secretary connecting this to the Biden administration's advocacy for investing in clean energy. First, would this qualify as clean? And looking ahead, how far of an investment are they talking about to make this practical?
Well, in theory, fusion energy is one of the cleanest forms of energy. You draw your fuel from water, from seawater. This is basically based on hydrogen that's extracted from there. And your waste products are negligible, minimal. This produces almost nothing, no greenhouse gases, and certainly no nuclear waste the way a conventional fission reactor would produce. But this has been a long-running scientific project. I mean, it began in earnest around the 1950s. So this is something that's been going on for basically 70-odd years. And while they did make a big advance today, crossing this critical threshold, it'll still be decades before we can actually see a practical, functional reactor putting power on the grid. So it's something that's going to require investment for years going forward. So certainly having more investment now would lay the groundwork for that. But fusion energy has also suffered from a lack of policy support. It's ebbed and flowed with various administrations and budgets. And now they've, finally met this milestone, but it remains to be seen whether that support will remain to bring this over the finish line.
The Energy Secretary also mentioned that private companies are looking at fusion. How is that going?
Right. There are several companies that are developing approaches that are similar to this or building off of these kinds of approaches and looking at other novel ways as well. The trouble is that this kind of research is very expensive. And again, this takes a lot of upfront research that lasts years. And so it's been difficult for the private sector to get funding to support this on their own. But there are projects that are underway and they have some commercial support. They have some investors who are willing to cast their vision decades down the line in order to get this to work. And if they do get it to work, this would be a game changer if this can be commercialized at scale. So certainly there is a value proposition there and the potential is immense. But, this is something that's been a struggle to get support for, both in the public and the private sector.
We're talking with Umair Irfan from Vox. I have to say, when I first heard that this announcement was going to be made, my mind went back a couple of decades to something called cold fusion and an announcement somewhere around 1990 that they had reached this milestone, but it turned out not to be true. Was what they announced today different than what was happening back then?
Absolutely. Like, this is one of the most robust findings in fusion for a very long time. And, you know, the key thing to remember is this is something that they've been pursuing slowly for a very long time. So last year, they got about 70% of the way to this particular target of getting to net energy positive. And so there was a lot of fanfare around that. And when I talked to scientists at the lab then, you know, they said that they were within striking distance, that they said that, you know, now that we're 70% of the way there, we know how to close the remaining gap. So certainly that they have this groundwork and this track record of, you know, doing this research and incrementally improving over time. So it makes sense that, you know, with a little bit more effort that they were able to eventually cross this line. Now, you know, there have been stops and starts in fusion and some misleading research out there and a lot of like over-promising and under-delivering. Now, and the thing to keep in mind here is while they did cross this threshold, they only crossed it by a very small margin. And in order to make this practical, they need to beat this goal of ignition by orders of magnitude, 10-fold, 100-fold, in order to actually generate more power than they put in order to actually boil water, to spin a turbine, to turn a generator, to produce electricity. So we're still a long ways off from making this practical, but this is an important proof of concept.
Umair Irfan is senior correspondent with Vox. His story is at vox.com and on Twitter at Umair Irfan. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Washington Today continues in a moment.
Live Wednesday on C-SPAN Radio. At 10 a.m. Eastern, survivors of the recent mass shooting at Club Q in Colorado Springs, Colorado, testify before the House Oversight Committee about LGBTQ violence. And at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell holds a news conference, where he is expected to announce another interest rate increase. Listen on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app, or ask your smart speaker to play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. At the White House, singer Cyndi Lauper singing her hit song from the 1980s, a celebration as several thousand guests attend the signing ceremony for the Respect for Marriage Act. A bill that requires same-sex and interracial marriage is performed in one state to be recognized by other states. Also guarantees the same federal benefits for same-sex couples as any other married couples. New York Times writes the push for passage of the law was driven in part by the Supreme Court's opinion overturning abortion rights, in which Justice Clarence Thomas raised the possibility of using the same logic to reconsider decisions protecting marriage equality and contraception rights. Opponents of this legislation argued that it would undermine family values in the United States and restrict the religious freedom of people who do not believe that same-sex marriage is moral. That's from the New York Times. The bill did pass Congress with some bipartisan support. 12 Republican senators and 39 Republican House members voted yes. Here's President Biden on the White House South Lawn.
Racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, they're all connected. But the antidote to hate is love. This law and the love it defends strike a blow against hate in all its forms. And that's why this law matters to every single American, no matter who you are or who you love. This shouldn't be about conservative or liberal, red or blue. No, this is about realizing the promise of the Declaration of Independence, a promise rooted in a sacred and secular beliefs, a promise that we're all created equal. We're all entitled to what Abraham Lincoln called an open field and a fair chance. You know, there's nothing more decent, more dignified, more American that we're about what we're doing here today. It's about who we are as a nation. It's about the substance of our laws. It's about being true to the best of the soul of America. Decency, dignity, love. Let me close with something else that happened on the same day that Congress sent me this bill. Brittany Griner was finally on her way home. I got to know her incredible wife as we worked to bring Brittany home from her unjust imprisonment in Russia. We were together in the Oval Office, her wife and I. We heard Brittany's voice on the phone when she was freed. And we addressed the nation together. When we did that, Brittany's wife said, quote, "Today, my family is whole. My fellow Americans, that all-consuming, life-altering, love and commitment, that's marriage. Thank you to everyone on the hard-fought victory generations in the making. It's been a long road, but we got it done. We're going to continue the work ahead, I promise you. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. And now, let me sign the Respect for Marriage Act into law."
President Biden on the South Lawn of the White House. He also called again on Congress to pass federal legislation known as the Equality Act to expand civil rights protections for LGBTQ people. He said when a person can be married in the morning and thrown out of a restaurant for being gay in the afternoon, this is still wrong. A story from ABC News, a wave of unauthorized migrants who entered the U.S. through El Paso in recent days has prompted immigration authorities to ramp up enforcement and processing. Over the weekend, authorities in El Paso, Texas, stopped migrants 2,460 times a day on average, according to the U.S. Border Patrol El Paso. That's compared to 2,150 since the beginning of December and 1,700 to 1,800 per day in the weeks prior. A similarly high rate of migration into El Paso was seen last October, a Customs and Border Protection official said, and that U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials descended on central El Paso began transferring some migrants out of the area to avoid overcrowding. On Capitol Hill today, Congressman Andy Biggs, Republican of Arizona, led a news conference calling for the impeachment of the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas over the issue of immigration.
In August 2021, I was the first member of Congress to introduce articles of impeachment against Secretary Mayorkas, and now that we have the majority in the House of Representatives, I expect our party to pursue impeachment next Congress. Secretary Mayorkas has committed high crimes and misdemeanors. His conduct is not incompetent, it's not negligent, it is willful and intentional. First, Secretary Mayorkas has failed to maintain operational control of the border as required under the law. The Secure Fences Act of 2006 requires the Secretary to achieve and maintain operational control of the border. It defines operational control as, quote, the prevention of all unlawful entries into the United States, including entries by terrorists, other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband, close quote. That is his duty and his obligation. Instead, the policies that he has enacted has produced the exact opposite of operational control. Current Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz said under oath that the Biden administration's border policies have, quote, no consequences, close quote, for illegal aliens arriving in our country. As a result, more than 4 million illegal aliens have been apprehended under Secretary Mayorkas' leadership. This number does not include known or unknown gotaways. His failure to maintain operational control of the border is allowing deadly, illegal drugs such as fentanyl to come into the country. Fentanyl is now the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45. His failure to maintain operational control of the border is creating a national security threat as well, because potential terror threats are entering the country. Immigration authorities at the border apprehended nearly 100 illegal aliens on the terror watch list in the fiscal year 2022. Second, he may have lied to Congress when he testified that he was maintaining operational control of the border. Congressman Chip Roy of Texas literally showed in this definition, the one I read to you earlier, and Secretary Mayorkas doubled down that he felt the border was secure. Third, Secretary Mayorkas is failing to detain illegal aliens as required by law. Instead, he is simply releasing illegal aliens into the country. The law is clear. Illegal aliens shall be detained. But Secretary Mayorkas has released more than 1 million illegal aliens into the country. Most of these released illegal aliens will never be heard from again. We don't know where they are, what they're doing. That's unacceptable. Fourth, he is abusing the narrow authority that Congress gave to him to parole aliens into the United States. The Immigration and Nationality Act allows the Secretary to parole agents into the United States, quote, only on a case-by-case basis for urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit, close quote. But Secretary Mayorkas is using parole in a categorical, generic manner and not on a case-by-case basis. I expect the House Judiciary Committee to open an impeachment inquiry in the 118th Congress, formally investigate Secretary Mayorkas, and finally to proceed to impeach him. The investigation will further prove that what we've been saying all along about Secretary Mayorkas. Every day Secretary Mayorkas remains in office, America becomes less safe.
Congressman Andy Biggs, Republican from Arizona, at a news conference outside the U.S. Capitol building, joined by about 20 other House Republicans. And the House Judiciary Committee, at the direction of the current Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, will start hearings to consider whether impeachment is warranted against Secretary Mayorkas. Impeachment requires passing a resolution in the House, which can be done by a simple majority, and then a trial happens in the Senate. Conviction requires a 2/3 vote. That's 67 senators if all senators are present. Congressman Biggs has challenged the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California for Speaker in the next Congress, when Republicans are going to be in a slight majority. Another expected area of House Republican investigation is the so-called Twitter files, disclosures by Twitter owner Elon Musk about content moderation on that social network, particularly handling of news about Hunter Biden, the son of President Joe Biden, before the 2020 election, and also limiting visibility of tweets by conservative commentators. Congressman McCarthy asked today by reporters about Twitter files and his run for Speaker.
What do you make of these recent Twitter file dumps from your friend, Mr. Elon Musk?
Well, one thing we find is what has been going on. It also raises a number of other questions. We now know that Twitter was working against and keeping information, knocking down conservatives and others, but what was happening on Facebook and Google? But it drives you to another level as well. Those 51 Intel, the Clapper, the Brennan and others, why did they sign a letter saying that it was Russian falsities about the Hunter Biden laptop? Who asked them to sign the letter? What made them drive to do the letter? Why did they lie to the American public? I think they need to come before committee as well.
Susan B. Anthony List has endorsed your candidacy for Speaker. What do you make of that, sir? This is a pro-life group.
Well, I think it's just my background of what we've been able to do in the majority, but more importantly, we got more than 85% of the conference on our vote just a number of weeks ago. I think we'll find a way that we all come together. I think people want to actually see what the American public voted for. They want to have a secure border. They want to have an economy that works and inflation is taken away. They want their gas prices lower, that they have an energy independence in America. They want their parents to have a say in their kids' education, the Parents' Bill of Rights, and they want a government that's held accountable. So I believe that just goes along with all the other things we've been working on.
In your speakership, what would be
let her ask a question.
Okay, have you made any headway with the members of your caucus who are insisting upon a motion to vacate the chair in order to get you to get their support?
I think we've been making a lot of progress. When we work through the conference, the rules, and others, is listening to everybody and working through. But I think people are in a much better place, and I think we'll all find a place to get together. Yes.
Is there any room or wiggle room for you on this, whether it's a broader caucus?
I think as a conference, we continue to talk together, look at all the rules. We're going to have another rules forum tomorrow as well. But walking out of this conference today, I think people are much more united. And if you talk to Vicky Hartzler, who's departing, just her comments, I think, were very powerful in the conference today about unity.
Is it still hard and fast, though, for you, that will not be included?
I think everybody will work together. We'll find a place to get together.
For conservatives who might be hesitant to support you for Speaker, what is your message, sir?
I don't know which conservative is. I mean, Jim Jordan's very strong, Marjorie Taylor Greene, 85% of the conference. I think we've got all the conservatives there. We'll just all find a way to make it. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Congressman Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, currently the minority leader, with reporters outside the room where House Republicans were meeting privately, talking about, among other things, the race for Speaker in the next Congress. The Republicans expected to have 222 seats, and to be elected Speaker requires majority of the House, 218. And judging by the vote within the House Republican Conference, as Congressman McCarthy mentioned a couple of weeks ago, there are some people who are against him, so at the moment does not have the votes for that. The vote for Speaker happens January 3rd, 2023. Congressman Benny Thompson, Democrat from Mississippi, the chair of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 insurrection, writes CNN, told reporters the committee will hold its final public meeting on Monday and that the panel's full report will come out December 21st. That would be Wednesday. Congressman McCarthy said the committee will approve the panel's final report on December 19th and make announcements about criminal referrals to the Justice Department Public won't see the final report until 2 days later. C-SPAN will be covering that hearing on Monday. The U.S. Africa Leaders Summit starting today in Washington. President Biden hosting 49 African heads of state out of the 54 African nations, plus the head of the African Union. State Department saying the summit will demonstrate the United States' enduring commitment to Africa and will underscore the importance of U.S.-Africa relations and increased cooperation on shared global priorities. One of the events today, Vice President Kamala Harris is speaking to the African and Diaspora Young Leaders Forum at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington.
So it is fitting that we gather here today in this magnificent and historic museum. The shape of this building is inspired by Yoruba art from West Africa. The metal lattice work that you see outside that surrounds the building is inspired by the intricate ironwork crafted by enslaved American and throughout, in particular the South, but African Americans who were enslaved in the United States. The building and many of the collections it holds are intended as a powerful reminder of the brutality of slavery and of the intertwined history between Africa and America, including our ongoing connections. It is a reminder of the strength and resilience of the African American people and the contributions of African Americans to our country. Africa is the oldest inhabited continent in the world, and it is home to the youngest population in the world. So Africa cannot help but be in the future business. I strongly believe that the creativity and ingenuity of Africa's young leaders will help us shape the future of the world, and that their ideas, your ideas, and innovations and initiatives will benefit the entire world. The Biden-Harris administration intends to be right there alongside you, these young leaders, knowing it is the spark and determination of young people that will drive and move us forward.
Vice President Kamala Harris at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, speaking to the African and Diaspora Young Leaders Forum, part of the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C. this week, the first U.S. Africa Leaders Summit since 2014. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. You can subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.